In the heart of England, football is more than just a sport. It's in the air people breathe. Right here in Manchester lies a club that is a symbol of British heritage and tradition. Manchester United isn't just a football club, it's a religion, a crown jewel in global sports. Its iconic status within British cultural life is on par with the royal family and the BBC.
Manchester United just says it all.
Yeah, it does.
The club's history is filled with legendary moments that are forever etched in the annals of football.
Beckham crosses from the left, right footed, it's a clear header, and it's lifted into the net! Solskjaer has won the European Cup for Manchester United!
But amid the roaring chants and red banners on Stretford End, there's a story of a hostile takeover that sent shockwaves throughout the football world. It's a story of how an American family on the other side of the Atlantic forcibly steered their way into the helm of this great British institution, igniting a storm of controversy and resistance.
The Glazers, they're not about the club. They're about money, they're about greed, they're about turning us into a cash cow, and that's what we don't want to be that.
Every time I go to Ghana, I pay 40 quid. I don't want to give 5 quid to an American owner who really doesn't care.
Well, we're protesting these parasites that have been owning this club for nearly 20 years now. You can see how angry everyone is here today. It's, culmination of anger from all those years.
We've supported them for nearly 30 odd years. Over 35 years.
Yeah.
And the club's just being bled dry by the Glazers. It's a cash cow.
You see, the arrival of the Glazer family in 2005 wasn't just a change in ownership. It was perceived as a hijack. No one wanted the Glazers around, not even the company's board of directors. The club went from a community-centric legacy to an ownership structure that now smelled of American dollars and greed. It was a stark shift in values that left a sour taste among United's working-class fans. How did a family with no real ties to English football end up owning one of the most beloved clubs in the world? What did this mean for Manchester United, its passionate fans, and the broader football industry? And to what extent is the hate towards the Glazer family actually justified?
It's criminal. It's a criminal act against football fans in this country. Make no mistake about it. This is the biggest sport in the world. This is the biggest sport in this country, and it's a criminal act against the fans. Simple as that.
There was 5,000 people who marched to Old Trafford that don't want Malcolm Glazer to take over the team.
They've got no loyalty to this country and these leagues.
It's just greed. That's the only word I would use to describe it. Nothing but greed. They couldn't care less about the football supporter.
To fully understand the magnitude of what transpired in Manchester in 2005, we need to travel back to the roots of Man United, a club that emerged from the industrial heartland of England in 1878. This was a different time. The club even had a different name. It was called Newton Heath Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Football Club. The club's official colours were green and gold, colours you still see United fans wear today as a sign of protest against the current owners. It's a statement to show that there's still a club of the people, and players like David Beckham agree. You see, the club's name and traditions were deeply rooted in its birthplace. Newton Heath is a small area in Manchester known for its industrial roots, and Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway was a company where the founding players worked. This was a club by the working class for the working class. It was a symbol of community, a mirror reflecting the hopes and dreams of the common man. The pride of watching your team on a weekend, regardless of life's daily pressures and obligations, was akin to honoring a rite of passage. It was a communion shared by the people of Manchester. By the late 19th century, football as a sport was taking off across England. New clubs were founded by local communities, workers' groups, and churches, all of them eager to establish their own teams and identities in the booming world of competitive play. Before the influx of billionaire owners and international consortiums in the modern football era, English clubs had ownership structures deeply rooted in their local communities. Similar to Newton Heath, many clubs were initially formed by workers from a particular industry or company. For instance, Woolwich Arsenal, which later became just Arsenal, was established by workers from the Royal Arsenal Armament Factory in Woolwich. West Ham United had its origins as Thames Ironworks FC, founded by workers of the Thames Ironworks and Shipbuilding Company. Meanwhile, clubs like Everton began as church teams, with its roots tied to the St. Domingo Methodist Chapel in Everton. As the sport became more popular and professional, some clubs transitioned to being owned or backed by local businessmen. Blackburn Rovers, for example, was backed by local industrialists, and Liverpool FC was formed by local businessman John Holding. The key word here is local. The acceptance of businessmen was heavily influenced by whether they were perceived as local people who were part of the community or whether they were outsiders. Local businessmen with clear ties and commitment to the community were seen as benefactors who cared about the club's success, both on and off the pitch. It made sense to invest in a club that you had followed as a child, a club that your parents taught you to love, and a club that your grandparents worshipped. Outsiders, however, who had no link to the area, the club, or its heritage, well, that was a different story. By the early 20th century, several English clubs started to struggle financially. As football's popularity soared across the country, clubs were forced to invest in larger stadiums, better infrastructure, and rising player salaries. But club revenues remained inconsistent. Their main source of revenue was the sale of matchday tickets, and second-tier clubs like Newton Heath struggled to consistently fill their grounds, especially when the team wasn't performing on the pitch. This, in combination with poor financial management, led Newton Heath to the brink of bankruptcy in 1902. The club had accumulated £2,670 in debt, which was a staggering amount for the time and equivalent to £300,000 today. This debt burden threatened the club's very existence. Newton Heath was luckily saved by timely investment from a group of businessmen led by John Davis, a local brewery owner. Following his financial intervention, the club was renamed Manchester United and its colours changed to red and white. Davis' investment and sound financial management not only saved the club from bankruptcy, but also provided the funds necessary for the club to secure a new stadium, Old Trafford, which opened in 1910. Davis paid for Old Trafford using cash and zero debt. This was a pivotal moment in the club's history, setting Man United on a path to eventually become one of the most iconic and successful clubs in the world. The turn of the millennium brought in a new era, not just for football, but the world at large. Globalization made the world smaller, and football was no longer immune to the tentacles of commercialization reaching into every corner. Football clubs with their massive following were lucrative ships waiting to be sailed on the high tides of capitalism. The English football landscape began to shimmer with the promise of global branding, and the prized gem of Manchester United sparkled a little extra, something that caught the eyes of the Glazer family across the Atlantic. The Glazers from the sunny shores of Florida weren't strangers to sports ownership. They owned the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFL, but football, the European kind, that was new territory. You see, American sports franchises are a different beast. In the US, sports teams can be moved across states, get rebranded and reshaped based on business interests. Ever wondered why the Los Angeles Lakers are called the Lakers? Up until 1960, they were based in Minnesota, which is known as the land of 10,000 lakes. LA doesn't have many lakes, but they kept the name after the move. Before the Glazer family bought the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they considered buying a Major League Baseball team. In their pitch, they outlined how the team would be located in 4 hometowns at the same time. This would be great for business. It would be 1 team, 4 cities, 4 stadiums, 4 sets of fans, and 4 sets of revenue. They didn't necessarily care about local pride and loyalty. To Europeans, the American franchise concept doesn't make much sense. In Europe, a football club is sacred. It's an identity that belongs to the local community. And so this cultural clash between American and British sporting ideologies was about to take center stage. Malcolm Glazer, the patriarch of the family, was originally from Rochester, New York. A college dropout, he got his start in the wash repair business and eventually expanded into residential and commercial real estate, investing in assets across the country. He was a sharp deal maker and went on to acquire a portfolio of businesses including nursing homes, shopping malls, and 4 TV stations. By age 35, he had bought a bank in upstate New York, and by age 56, he had built the holding company First Allied Corporation, which owned equity stakes in companies such as Zapata Corporation, Harley-Davidson, and Formica. Nicknamed the Leprechaun for his short stature and ginger beard, Malcolm Glazer was an M&A mastermind. An industry-agnostic investor, he would find an asset that he liked with untapped potential, use large amounts of debt to acquire it, and relentlessly drive down costs. He had no hobbies outside work, rarely took vacations, and didn't care about sports. All he cared about was deals. Together with his 6 children, who he had installed as leaders in his business empire, he was always on the hunt for the next big family acquisition. Despite his success, Malcolm was unknown to most people, especially Europeans. On Wall Street, he was known as a 2nd or 3rd division corporate raider. He was good, but there were much bigger players out there who chased the biggest and sexiest deals. But by the early 2000s, things started to change. Malcolm Glazer's name started to appear in English media. The American had set his sight on his next big acquisition. Having gone public in 1991, United was now listed on the London Stock Exchange, and the team's performance under manager Sir Alex Ferguson had catapulted the club into one of the most beloved teams in the world, with an estimated 333 million fans globally. But Malcolm and his 3 sons, Avram, Joel, and Brian, believed United still had a lot of room to grow commercially, especially in emerging markets like Asia. And they weren't the only ones interested in the prized asset.
With one of the biggest footballing stories ever. Rupert Murdoch's B-Sky B company to take over Manchester United for £625 million. It was Chief Executive Martin Edwards who coordinated the deal.
Rupert Murdoch and his Sky Television offered to take United private in 1999. But the deal was blocked by regulators over antitrust issues. UK officials were concerned that Murdoch's potential ownership of United, combined with his already extensive media holdings, would create a conflict of interest and give him too much influence over football broadcasting rights. Meanwhile, Irish horse racing magnates JP McManus and John Magnier began accumulating a stake through their company Cubic Expression. They bought out Rupert Murdoch after his failed takeover and now owned 28.7% of the club. By 2001, Manchester United was generating £129 million in annual revenue and raking in over £18 million in profit. The Glazers saw this as an excellent opportunity. United was the perfect acquisition target for 3 key reasons. 1. The club had strong brand recognition globally, but the Asian market was still untapped. This presented significant commercial growth opportunities. 2. United was profitable, a rare thing for a football club. This made it an attractive target for a leveraged buyout, Malcolm's favorite acquisition method. In an LBO, the acquirer uses a significant portion of borrowed money to finance the acquisition without having to put up much of their own capital, leveraging the company's assets as collateral for the loans. 3, and perhaps most importantly, since United was a publicly traded company, shares could be bought on the open market without direct permission from existing shareholders or the club's management. This made it a whole lot easier for the Glazers to gradually build an influential stake in the club. And so on March 2nd, 2003, the Glazers made their first move. Through a holding entity called Red Football, they acquired a 2.9% stake in Manchester United for £9 million. This might seem like a mere dip in the water, but it was the beginning of a tidal wave. By September that same year, the Glazers nudged their stake up to 3.2%. Again, a seemingly innocent increase, but this time it was significant enough that it required the company's management to be notified. Rumors about a full takeover began to spread.
Been a tremendous amount of excitement revolving around Manchester United for some weeks now. We've seen different players coming in and building up their stake for the company.
Just 1 month later, the Glazers' buying spree accelerated, expanding their ownership to 9.7%, and by November, that number had surged to 14.3%. Their intentions became clear after a meeting with David Gill, the club's CEO. The Glazers had not arrived in Manchester to be minority shareholders. They were, in fact, looking to take over the entire institution. But this wasn't going to be easy. You see, the Manchester United board resisted a full takeover. During a high-stakes shareholder meeting in November 2004, the board officially rejected the Glazers' offer. They didn't want the club to be owned by Americans who lacked European footballing experience and who were looking to finance the deal through an LBO. After the shareholder meeting, everyone thought the board had successfully killed the Glazers' takeover attempt. JP Morgan, the investment bank that Glazers had hired to finance the deal, publicly resigned in protest as English newspapers taunted the Americans. But the Glazers weren't going to back down that easy. People had been skeptical about their ability to acquire the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 1995, so this was not necessarily a new battle for them. They were determined to own Manchester United whether people liked it or not. You see, the Glazers didn't need the board's approval. They just needed to convince other large shareholders to sell their existing shares. To accomplish this, they decided to move in stealth, use code names, and only meet in secret places. They named the initiative Project Hampstead, and Man United's codename became Mercury. The Glazers, who now owned 28.1% of the company, just below the 29% threshold which would automatically trigger a takeover attempt, regularly met with its investment bankers from Rothschild at Trump's Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Rothschild recommended that they convince Magnier and McManus to sell their 28.7% stake. It was a simple but genius strategy. By circumventing the board, the Glazers were staging a hostile takeover. No other shareholders owned enough shares to block a bid. The fans would be powerless to resist. Oh, and the Glazers had some pretty sharp finance minds backing their initiative too. Remember how JP Morgan publicly resigned as the Glazers' bankers after the unsuccessful shareholders meeting? Well, that move was more about optics than actual disengagement. You see, JP Morgan's company policy was to not support hostile takeovers. But the Glazers had secretly agreed on a deal with the bank in which they would continue to work on a takeover bid away from the public eye. Working behind the scenes was a JP Morgan banker who would become a central character at United for years to come. Ed Woodward was instrumental in navigating the complex waters of this high-profile acquisition. The deal itself was a masterclass in financial engineering. The Glazers offered £790 million for Manchester United, of which the family would only contribute a fraction in equity, £220 million. The rest, £520 million, was financed through debt from JP Morgan and a consortium of hedge funds, including Citadel. The family was so impressed by Ed Woodward that they hired him to help run the club as chief of staff. And in 2012, he was promoted to CEO. But how exactly did the Glazers convince McManus and Magnier to sell their stake? The key lay in a dispute that had little to do with football and everything to do with a racehorse named Rock of Gibraltar.
It could be enough for Valley Doyle here because Rock of Gibraltar is proving very hard to pass, and in fact he's roaring right away like a smart 2-year-old. Rock of Gibraltar wins the Gimcrack. Ho Choi a big run for second, then Twilight Blues and Waldenberg, Sadat and a Woolharn.
Sir Alex Ferguson, United's legendary manager, claimed that he was owed half the stud fees for the racehorse, which was co-owned by Ferguson and John Magnier's wife, Sue. This dispute had soured relations between Ferguson and Magnier, creating a rift within the club's hierarchy. It had gotten to the point where United fans, who always sided with their beloved manager, threatened Magnier and McManus, storming their racetracks and graffitiing their homes. Sensing an opportunity, the Glazers decided to capitalize on this discord. They approached McManus and Magnier with an offer that was hard to refuse, a lucrative exit from a club now plagued by internal conflict. McManus and Magnier would get paid a nice premium and the opportunity to stick it to United's fans who had backed Ferguson during the racehorse dispute. The Irishmen knew that the fans hated the Glazers and selling out to them would be a sweet revenge. The sale of Cubic Expression's 28.7% stake was the linchpin that effectively handed control of Manchester United to the Glazers. The UK's most prestigious institution was now owned by an American family who had put an unprecedented amount of debt on the company's balance sheet. Safe to say, no one in Manchester was happy about it.
What's wrong with the Glazers? Well, the fact of all the debt they're putting us in, they're taking money out of the club. They're taking 75p out of every pound out of the club. It's going to run out sooner or later.
Who's going to pay for that debt? The likes of the fans on the street, by everything going up, increased prices.
And opposing fans didn't spare the opportunity to rub it in. Yet, amid the uproar and discontent, the fundamental question remained: how would this seismic shift in ownership affect the club's financial and operational strategy? In football, a club's business model is almost as intricate as the game itself. For Man United, the key revenue streams are threefold. 1. Matchday sales, including ticket sales and hospitality. 2. Broadcasting rights for both domestic and international games. And 3. Commercial deals, including sponsorships and merchandise sales. Meanwhile, the cost structure is dominated by player wages, transfer fees, and the day-to-day operational costs of running a top-tier club. Revenue has exploded under the Glazers, soaring from £222 million in 2005 to £648 million in 2023, largely due to aggressive commercial and branding strategies. United has become a commercial juggernaut, with broadcasting and commercial deals making up a larger percentage of revenue now than ever before. The Glazers have demonstrated a unique ability to secure lucrative partnerships, including its record-breaking 10-year kit deal with Adidas worth £900 million and its $60 million per year sponsorship deal with Qualcomm Snapdragon. But this commercial success has definitely come at a cost. Manchester United has paid out approximately £747 million in interest payments since 2005, almost as much as the club's initial purchase price. The Glazers have also issued themselves £166 million in dividends. This outflow of capital could have been reinvested back into the club. Some people have also attributed the increase in ticket prices to the club's debt service. But this isn't entirely accurate. The cheapest matchday ticket price for the 2005-2006 season was £21. By the 2010-11 season, it had increased to £27 per game, representing an annual 5% increase over 5 years. Meanwhile, the most expensive seat at Old Trafford climbed from £37 to £49, which equates to a 6% rise every year. But what about the 5 years before the Glazers takeover? In 2000, the lowest priced ticket was £17, which the board gradually increased to £21, or an annual 4% rise over 5 years. Meanwhile, the most expensive ticket rose from £26 to £37, a 7% rise every year. So ticket prices have been increasing both before and after the Glazer takeover. That being said, United supporters are still justified in their frustration. While revenues have soared under the Glazers, investments in player transfers and overall team composition have been scrutinized. This is particularly serious when considering United's fluctuating success on the pitch since 2005. The club has not won the Premier League since Ferguson left in 2013. They've fired 4 managers and have lost serious ground to domestic and European rivals.
In some ways, you could say it was not a surprise losing against Brighton because Brighton is so good, but they can't lose at home against Brighton. They're Manchester United.
Well, we're Man United. That's a distant past. There was a Manchester United. It's nowhere near what we're seeing right now.
The Glazers have also refused to invest in the much-needed modernization of Old Trafford, once a fortress of European football, now showing signs of neglect and decay. The roof has been leaking, and there have been reports of mice in the stadium corridors. This overall sense of wear and tear is not just a minor inconvenience, it's symbolic of a deeper issue. Old Trafford no longer reflects the stature of a top-tier club. This speaks to the broader narrative of prioritizing immediate financial gains over the long-term legacy and heritage of the club. For fans, Old Trafford is more than just a stadium. It's a temple, it's a theater of dreams, a place where history is made and legends are born. The Glazer family's failure to maintain and upgrade the stadium is a failure to honor the club's history and its place in the heart of the community.
But we shouldn't accept that, because I'm happy to lose football matches. I'm happy to be 4th in the league, 3rd in the league, 6th in the league, if we're doing the right things. So, have we got Manchester United should always have a world-class stadium. It hasn't. It should always have best-in-class training facility. It should always have best-in-class fan experience. It should always buy the best, being for the best players in the Premier League. It should always have young talent coming through, and it should always buy young emerging talent from overseas. It's veered away from all 5 or 6 of its key principles and objectives that it's always ever had. Any business does that, then it's in trouble. You've got owners that, to be fair, are now taking dividends out of the club. They're taking big, large payments in debt out of the club, or interest payments on the debt out of the club. All the money that the club generates, to be fair, is not going back into the club, and it's now come home to roost.
Historically, Chelsea under Roman Abramovich, Manchester City under Sheikh Mansour, and more recently Newcastle United under the Saudis have seen significant investments from their owners. These investments have often been directed towards player acquisitions and infrastructural development. In contrast, the Glazers' approach has primarily involved in leveraging the club's own revenue streams for growth and investment, rather than infusing personal capital. Across Europe, clubs like PSG in France and Inter Milan in Italy have also experienced controversial takeovers that have changed their fortunes. PSG's takeover by Qatar Sports Investments has seen them become a powerhouse in French football, thanks to hefty financial backing that has allowed them to attract world-class talent. Inter, after years of financial uncertainty, experienced a resurgence under the ownership of Sunning Holdings Group, although recent financial pressures have again cast uncertainty over the long-term project. These contrasts raise questions about the sustainability and effectiveness of different ownership models in football. While some clubs have reaped benefits by winning trophies, Manchester United's approach under the Glazers has been more commercially oriented, focusing on maximizing revenue streams and exploiting the club's brand globally. So if everyone seems to hate the Glazers, how come they've held on to the club for so long? Despite years of protests and demands to sell the club, the Glazers have maintained control, keeping the world's biggest club hostage. Any normal investor would have given up and sold the club a long time ago. But the Glazers are different. They have always maintained a low profile, rarely engaging with the media or addressing fan concerns directly. They're willing to put up with the drama, as if it's the price of owning Manchester United.
Anything to say to Manchester United fans, Mr. Glazer? Is it time to sell the club, Mr. Glazer? Nothing to say at all. Are the fans just customers to you? Is the customer always right, Mr. Glazer? Nothing to say at all to the fans of Manchester United, Mr. Glazer. This is an opportunity for you. An apology, perhaps. Are the fans just customers to you, Mr. Glazer?
But in November 2022, the Glazers did signal a potential shift in their strategy by announcing that they're exploring strategic alternatives for the club.
Kaveh, let's start with you, shall we? Why are the Glazers selling now?
Well, I think they feel that now is the time to sell the club. Look, a lot of Manchester United fans have been unhappy for a very, very long time. The Glazers bought the club 17 years ago. I still remember there were protests from fans at the time as well. You have to consider how the Glazers funded their takeover of Manchester United. They didn't buy the club with their own money. They borrowed £600 million to buy United in a leveraged buyout, and they loaded that debt onto the club. So the club has been paying off that debt. And 17 years later, the debt is still around £600 million.
One of the most notable developments was the bid from Sheikh Yazim, who offered £5 billion for 100% of the club. He promised to clear United's debt and invest up to £1.4 billion in player transfers and modernizing Old Trafford. But the Glazers rejected the offer. It didn't meet their valuation expectations. The Glazers have valued United at £6 billion, which in my view isn't completely unreasonable. Chelsea sold for £4.25 billion in 2022, and United is significantly more attractive as an asset, both financially and commercially. So what happened instead? In November 2023, British billionaire Jim Ratcliffe was in discussions to acquire a 25% minority stake in Manchester United at a £4.4 billion valuation. His involvement could potentially provide a fresh perspective on how the club is run. But the Glazers still own majority, and the club's fate ultimately remains in their hands. The financialization of football, underscored by billionaire ownerships, has morphed the game into a high-stakes boardroom battleground. For Manchester United, the Glazer era has challenged the very essence of what a football club means to its supporters, igniting a debate that resonates far beyond Old Trafford. Will United reclaim its former glory and reconnect with its roots, or will it continue to be controlled by billionaires who don't care about the club's heart and soul?